Welcome into the Bears Squad Show. I'm Joe George, post-game host. Who should the Bears target in free agency?
I'm Lauren Cox, host of Locked On Bears. Darnell Wright is becoming eligible for an extension, and they should lock him down now before that price tag goes up.
Hey guys, Taylor Dahl here, host of Making Monsters, and the Bears have their next offensive coordinator. I've got some thoughts on that.
Bear down, Chicago. It's the Bears Squad. Everything Chicago Bears every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Windy City. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From Soldier Field to the next great chapter, the Bears Squad Show starts now.
Welcome into the Bears Squad Show here on the Locked On Bears YouTube and audio channels. Joe George, Lauren Cox, and Taylor Dahl here with you for the next hour as Super Bowl is over, and we are about a month away from free agency opening, which means the Bears will be bringing in new players. They'll be getting rid of players. The Darnell Wright is eligible for a new contract. They've got a new OC, and it feels like we have movement happening with the stadium, which we haven't really discussed as a group. So we'll discuss that as well on today's show. But first, we'll take a look at free agents, who the Bears, who you want them to target. And I'm going to go first on this one. And there's a big caveat with my first one, okay? So what we talked about last week. So it's if they trade DJ Moore, you need another wide receiver. I put Mike Evans at the top of my list of bring in a veteran wide receiver to come add to this team. He's not going to break the bank in free agency. I'm sure Tampa Bay wants to bring him back to be with Godwin and Ibuka. But Mike Evans was the first name. I was like, you know what? If the Bears move DJ Moore, that's the guy I would like to see them go target to add to this wide receiver room. Lauren, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, price tag is obviously going to be the big factor there, because even if you trade DJ Moore, wide receiver to me still falls down a few pegs on the hierarchy of rankings there. So if you can get a good deal on a veteran, Mike Evans, absolutely. But he's a guy who was making $20 million this past season, and maybe that's more rewarding him for past play. And now that he's at the end of that contract, that number can and will come down. But how much does it come down? Are you better off? It was putting, $10, $15 million into a year of Mike Evans, or is that a position that, you could throw another draft pick in there to try and fill in? I mean, I like the idea of the body type addition being brought in, that big body physical receiver that they don't quite have, at least that sort of tough physical contested catch wide receiver, but that is partially what they get at the tight end position with Colston Loveland. So I can see where having that makes a difference, but I don't know that he jumps out at me as oh yeah, that's the guy that it's going to be the free agent that you get excited about that's going to make the big difference.
Yeah, I think when that one is difficult, because I feel like when you are going to have to, if you have to replace DJ Moore, you are replacing, and I know this year people weren't exactly totally pleased with the statistics, just like if you're looking at box scores, but DJ Moore is just such a playmaker. So you are having to replace just that kind of comfortability factor. You're having to replace some of those yards after catch, the big play moments that DJ can have. So there's a lot of different type of wide receivers that I think you'd want to factor into that. I do think it's what's your confidence level on, a Roman Luther as your 1-2, and then a Jade, or being able to grab somebody else in the draft and feel like you can replace it that way without having to put money into that position group. And I think that's going to be one of the bigger questions. But when it comes to what you'd be spending, I mean, obviously that's something that you'd pretty much be possibly even upgrading at that position even more so. And we talked about how much they, the different personnel sets and how much they used those three wide receivers out on the field at a lot. And it was a good amount of time. And a lot of people were expecting more of the 2 tight end, 3 tight end looking, different sets and that. And we saw a lot of the wide receivers out there. You want ones that have blocking ability. That's something that Ben Johnson's made very clear. So it would be interesting, but I mean, I don't think you'd ever say no to him. He's a really good wide receiver and he's very proven. I do think the number kind of comes along with that and the dire need. I feel like if they truly feel like Roman Luther can be 2 of the top wide receivers in at least the division, then I don't know how much they put into that.
I do worry just a little bit about 33-year-old wide receiver coming off of an injury. That's if Mike Evans had played 15 games last season, I might feel a little bit more oh yeah, they can still squeeze a little bit more out of this. But it kind of feels like maybe this is the beginning of a more precipitous decline. And maybe there's a little PTSD from Grady Jarrett, coming in as veteran player coming off an injury that, he'll be back and back to full strength next season and get you good play again. It's like, oh, maybe not quite as much as you hoped.
So, Lauren, who's at the top of your list when you look at free agency of like who you would like the Bears to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's going to point right away to like, just sign Trey Hendrickson. He's the big sack leader. Go out and get him. And like, that's probably not the most realistic thing to just go into free agency as that plan A. But so I think for me, I look at like, give me a similar style of like proven pass rusher, right? I don't want to take a chance on a young guy that you hope he's going to play better in 2026 than he did in 2025 and give you, all this like hope of more, but like give me the guy who has been consistent and proven when he's on the field, he is going to rush the passer. So whether that's someone like Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa, like you got to go through the injury history a little bit there and do your homework, like who's still going to be the most sustainable. But like those are the two guys at the top of the list in terms of the defensive line that I'm like, yeah, give me somebody that I just, exactly what you're getting from them and that it's going to be something solid. Maybe the ceiling is limited at this stage of their career, but like veteran who can rotate in with this group is not going to eat all of Austin Booker's playing time, but like they stay fresh and your younger guys still get an opportunity to play. Feels like a really nice balance there.
Taylor?
Yeah, I think, and that's what this is going to be one of the ones we talk about a lot because that pass rush has to get fixed this year. I mean, you saw what Seattle looked like, and the whole time watching the Super Bowl, I was like, man, like if Bears had Seattle's defense this year, I feel like we would have won it all, and that's the kind of the mindset of what you can do when you start filling in some of those positions. So I do like not throwing another dart and hoping something works like in Odengbo or some of the things that they've tried to just kind of patchwork the pass rush with and really getting somebody that you've seen something out of at a consistent level. I personally, I kind of like a John Franklin Myers from Denver. I think that he, 7 sacks. He plays multiple positions on the line. I think that's something we've seen that a Dennis Allen defense likes is being able to move some of those guys around and the versatility of guys that can play different roles on the defensive line. He's good at, he's good against the run. He does a lot of things in that area. The pressures are probably, you see more pressures than you do the direct sacks, but I do think that you get 14 in 2 years. That's something that I feel like you start to see some consistency. He's a little deeper into the career, so you have that experience there. But he hasn't been on the best teams aside from Denver. So I don't know if you've like fully seen what he could truly be. But somebody like that, I could see a fit just because of the versatility and kind of how they'd be able to use him in different ways in an Allen defense. And then, like I said, I think just having the back-to-back years with 7 sacks shows that you can probably get that 7 to 10 range from him at least for a few more years. And I don't know if the contract would be so steep for somebody like that just because he hasn't had that like 13, 14 sack season.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting name. And I had Khalil Mack on my list too, Lauren, of just someone like, I think that makes sense. Like the reunion would be fun. Like it would be fun to have him back in Chicago. But like besides this last year, he's been healthy and he still played in 12 games this last year, had 5.5 sacks. So Khalil Mack was one where I was like, okay, are the Chargers, with the flaws that they have on their roster, are they going to say, okay, we're going to move on from Khalil Mack? Like, they just moved on from one of the Bosa brothers the previous year. Like, they seemed okay doing that, didn't have any hesitation. So I'm really curious what the Chargers' plan will be and like how desperate they will feel to get Mack to return. Because if he's in the market, like kind of what you were saying, Taylor, too, like it doesn't feel like it's going to be a huge contract. Like with the age, everything, like it feels within the Bears' reason. Before we get into maybe the next guy on our list, I do want to hit back on something you said, Lauren, about Trey Hendrickson. Like when you think of free agency and improving and getting like that elite pass rusher, are you thinking trade or are you looking at Trey Hendrickson? Like, what do you think is the more logical solution for the Bears at that position?
Yeah, it's such a catch-22 there because I don't want to say it's a lose-lose, but you just feel like, if you go the free agent route, you're going to spend a bunch of money and it's a huge risk as to why is this guy a free agent? Why didn't his own team really want to resign? And you can always talk yourself into, well, with Hendrickson, it's the Bengals and they're poorly run or whatever, but like guys hit free agency for a reason. Like it's a very risky gamble there. Whereas like the really more reliable guys are the ones that end up getting traded because the teams know they're valuable enough to not let them actually walk and get to free agency. But then you're giving away premium draft picks in order to get that player. And it feels like the Bears are in a position where you really need to keep stacking successful draft classes, stacking first round picks. I mean, you look at Like the Seahawks, people have been pointing out, like if you look at their last 5 drafts in the first round, they've pretty much hit on every single one of those picks. They've had multiple first round picks in some of those years. And that's such a key to building the foundation of a contending and Super Bowl champion team that, like, I don't like the idea of giving up a bunch of your future assets to go trade for a guy. But then I don't like the idea of clearing a bunch of cap space and taking a big risk on Trey Hendrickson that you think will work, but rarely do we see the big free agent splash actually work as well as a team thinks it will. But you got to do something to upgrade the pass rush. I just don't like any of the options as like, this is the one you can clearly feel super comfortable about. And that's why I kind of lean more like get a veteran kind of guy and then use an early draft pick and like get the older veteran to kind of bridge you to while you keep building your pass rush through the draft.
Taylor?
Yeah, I agree. I think that free agency, it's risky. And I do think that the numbers, sometimes you end up having to overpay in free agency. And that's something that you see a lot. You see every now and then it work. And there's been, I mean, Seattle and New England were both 2 of the top 4 highest, investing into their free agents last year. Granted, a lot of that for Seattle was Sam Darnold, but I think that when you look at those numbers, a lot of times it starts to get a little risky, especially because there's usually 2 tails of this. You're getting an older player who's at the tail end of the career, it feels like, and you're getting those final couple years, or there's been injury involved in it. And so it's kind of been that mindset, or someone who just hasn't really worked and you're kind of looking for the ceiling of it. And that's where free agency has kind of shown recently for a lot of teams. But I do think, I think Seattle and New England are 2 examples of you can find things that kind of to fit and plug into, especially I think defensively. I went through actually on Helmets and Heels last week and broke down, it took forever, but every roster in the NFL and what their starters, the percentage of their starters that were drafted and the percentage that were through free agency and traded. And Seattle and New England offensively have a lot of drafted pieces. It's kind of been like they've built through the draft on one side of the ball and then have had a lot of trades and free agency and all of the other pieces defensively. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit more, getting those veteran defensive pieces and then kind of drafting your wide receivers and your tight ends and your running backs and your quarterbacks, obviously. So an offensive line is a big one. But I do think it's just risky with free agency because I do think you're looking at players that are either on the tail end or have dealt with injuries, and you're trying to say, hey, is it worth it to spend to kind of overpay on this person if you can get the production they had 2 years ago? Like, that's the conversation we have for a lot of free agents. But I do think sometimes you have to find the right guys that plug and fit your system, and at least you have tape on them in the NFL, and you can say, okay, we you can actually see what they've done on the field at that specific position.
Yeah, I think back to last year in free agency, and it's so easy with hindsight now to say, oh, well, Milton Williams was such a great signing for the Patriots. So I look at how big of an impact he's been on their defensive line. Everybody should have tried to sign Milton Williams. And sure, yes, but for every big Milton Williams signing last offseason, there's Jonathan Allen goes to Minnesota and is a total bust in free agency. Javon Hargrave goes to Minnesota and isn't anywhere close to what they wanted. Grady Jarrett comes to Chicago, doesn't really do a lot there. Draymond Jones, the Titans. Like, there's a bunch of examples of a bunch of free agents that didn't work, and then every year there's 1 or 2 that might work. And boy, it sure would be nice if you could figure out who that's going to be every year. But there was an equal possibility where Milton Williams doesn't end up panning out for the Patriots, and they put $26 million a year into that contract. And we see it every year on the defensive line. Like, big names get signed, and maybe one works out, and you're lucky if you're that one. But it's a big gamble to put a bunch of your free agent cap space into.
And I do think like team specific too, like you'll see it just work certain times. I mean, we have the example of Al-Qadim Muhammad, and it just didn't work here. And then he goes on, and since then he's like been pretty decent, and he's at the top of a lot of those free agent lists. So is that somebody you like try again? Because you're like, oh, well, maybe it works with Dennis Allen. I say no on that. I feel like you've tried that. But I do think the place and the team and the fit, like sometimes I think teams are just like, oh, this free agent is, he had X amount of sacks last year, and this is his pressures, and this is what it looks like, and not technically zone in so much on if it fits your scheme and what they can do. And that's what hurts a lot of teams. So I'm hoping this coaching regime in Chicago now is smarter than that to actually make sure the fit is that whether it's, for Ben Johnson or Dennis Allen, either way.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember when Christian Wilkins was going to solve all the Bears' problems and worked out so well for them there.
Taylor, who's at the top of your free agency wish list for the Bears?
Yeah, so I mentioned John Franklin Myers. He's definitely one that I'm kind of keeping an eye on. And a lot of this goes to contracts too. Like I don't know where a lot of these guys will end up getting paid. So we're talking about clearing cap space right now and trying to get the Bears to have money. So that also depends on it anyways. But another one, and this is maybe because it's close to home, but Devin Lloyd here in Jacksonville. And I know we're talking about Tremaine Edmonds probably not going to be back in Chicago, but Devin Lloyd, what his improvement that I've seen this year, and it sounds like the Jags have not even had conversations with him. And so there's not really, it's not known yet if he's going to actually hit free agency or if they're going to try and pay him. But it sounds like no conversations have even been had. So to me, that kind of seems like maybe it's leaning they're going to part ways. I don't know how much Devin Lloyd is going to end up getting. He's only had one season where you feel like the production has been super high. I do feel like part of that is just because Ryan Nielsen last year was a complete disaster. And so you saw little glimpses, but you just didn't get to see the full development out of Lloyd. But this year, everything. And I feel like he fits Dennis Allen so well. He can get after the quarterback pretty well. You know, you can use him in blitz situations. He's good against the run. He got a lot better in coverage this year. That was one of his bigger struggles last year, was dropping back into coverage. And you saw that improve. He had 5 interceptions this year. He was just all over the field, and it was really fun to kind of watch that. Again, I don't know how much you'd have to pay him. So that's where kind of that comes into terms, because a lot of lists have him as one of the top linebackers available too. And I know you have a DeMarco Jackson. And so how much do they invest in linebacker when you need so much defensive line and probably some secondary? I don't know the answer to that. But if you're looking for a linebacker that I feel fits in the Dennis Allen defense really well and can do a lot of different things, that's a Devin Lloyd.
It scares me just a little bit because I think back to like Tremaine Edmonds coming over to Chicago. You feel some of those similar vibes of like, you see it all come together and you're like, okay, then is that the guy we're going to get every year, or is there going to be some ups and downs in that? And that's part of the risk of free agency, right? Is like you're betting on, oh, this is going to be the guy that continues to play at a high level, but you take him out of the specific scheme that he had been working well with down there and you think it's going to fit into your scheme, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But that's where, again, like, cost and price becomes a big factor here, because when you're giving Tremaine Edmonds the 3rd highest linebacker contract in the NFL, that's a lot more of a risk than if you can give Devin Lloyd, whatever a much more reasonable number might be, to say, okay, now even if he's not great elite special, he can still be good value for you, even if he's closer to average and someone you can rely on and count on. Like if Tremaine Edmonds was making 10 or 12 million instead of 17.5, I think we'd have very different conversations about him in Chicago.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, think of DeMarco Jackson, just like the impact that he had immediately. Like, is this something that Dennis Allen can really lock in on and find like that real value at the linebacker position? Because it's one of those spots where, not as dramatic, obviously, as like safety and running back, but has been hit a little bit harder in free agency. Like, it feels like there's always 1 or 2 guys that get paid, but everyone else is kind of like a mid-level contract and is palatable for teams that bring them in. So yeah, I think for me, it's just like, how much belief do you have in Dennis Allen's ability to just find, low-level linebackers? Like, is there still hope for Ruben Hippolyte, like, to be a factor on this team? I doubt it. But like, is there hope in the organization for that? It might tell us a lot about what the Bears view that room as, if they can bring back DeMarco Jackson and then, move on from Tremaine Edmonds, which I think we're all okay with at this point. All right, let's take our first break here. We'll continue looking at our free agency targets. We'll do that next here on the Bears Squad Show.
This episode of the Bears Squad Show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for the events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. And that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The drama of curling matches that start slow and somehow get intense fast. Speed skating races decided by inches. Hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. Even niche events become must-watch when you're fully locked into the competition. I've really been enjoying the biathlon this year, where they're skiing downhill as fast as they can and then laying down and shooting targets and then getting back up and skiing again for another 5 kilometers. It's crazy. It's a lot of fun. And FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. The winter games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game.
All right, so one of the positions here, obviously the Bears don't have any safeties on their roster. I think we all want Kevin Byard back. Jaquan Brisker's a big question. If you look at Spotrac, which I don't know. Sometimes it's hit or miss with what these guys actually get in free agency. They've got him right around $10 million. I had him as like tied for like the third most valuable safety in free agency, according to what they have listed out. But I was looking at the safety position, and the first guy I thought of, and it's trying not to be biased because of that last game the Bears played, but if the contracts are, if it's comes a little bit lower, Cam Curl was one of the names that stood out to me of like, that makes sense to help bring in with Byard, fix your safety position, be set for next year. So Cam Curl would probably be the top safety on my wish list if you're for sure going to move on from one of Brisker or Byard, Warren.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who you feel like is a nice combination of like young player who can still keep getting better, but also has been, ascending and proven enough that like he's someone you can trust and rely on. Like I do think he played a little better in LA this past season than the year before. And I know there was some frustrations, especially early on, I think, with Rams fans feeling like they just wanted a little bit better from him. But I think you saw as the season went on, he kind of settled into that more and more. And I think if you put him in Chicago with someone like Byard next to him and presumably some pass rush upgrades in front of him, he's a guy who you feel comfortable can give you a nice 2-deep shell with Byard when you need to, but can also kind of step up in the box and be, a versatile coverage defender underneath. Like maybe not the most physical in terms of stepping up and being, that like extra linebacker in the box. But I like the idea of saying, hey, let's take away the deep ball because we have these two guys that you feel like can do a little bit of everything, but primarily can roam that back end nicely.
Yeah, I think that, and I said this last week, I believe it was, that I hope we can keep the secondary intact as much as possible, but the expectations are probably one of those, at least one of those safeties are gone, and you're definitely going to have to address that room. Either way, I think you'd need to. I think that if you somehow manage to keep Brisker and Byard, you're still probably investing in safety somehow, maybe more the draft in that sense, if it comes down to that, just because of, you look at the Brisker history, injury history, and you kind of have to think about that. And then Kevin Byard getting a little older. And so there's still, I think you'd have to address it either way, but I like that name. That's one of the names that I had on my list when it comes to safeties too. And I feel like the safety, free agency list this year is interesting because there's a few names. There's Nick Cross, Kobe Bryant, another two names that I feel like maybe you look at. I like Kobe Bryant, and obviously you got a better look at him in the Super Bowl, but I do think that a Nick Cross may fit a little bit better personally. He's one of the guys he can get to the quarterback too. That's something that I think he had 2.5 sacks this year. So that's something that obviously you've seen Brisker do in moments. And I do think that's something that we've seen Dennis Allen like to do when it comes to the safeties and the corner blitzes and doing things like that. So having personnel that can kind of fit into that world. He's not the biggest interception getter, which we didn't really, other than like Byard had a ton of picks this year. Brisker really wasn't able to do that. So I feel like that's not something you have to totally focus on, but Al Harris may also be like, all right, well, he's had a few in his career. Let's see what we could get out of him this year. So that's another two of the safeties. And I know I saw one of the top 100s, and all three of those, Curl, Cross, and Bryant, sat in the top like 40 total, and it was just a full rankings of all position groups. And so all of them sat in the top of that. And so I think it's just kind of your best fit and who can go across from Kevin Byard. That's another thing that Cross has played free and strong safety. So you have some versatility there. Also, I think he's even played nickel corner too. So you have somebody who's played a lot of different positions on that back end, which I think would help.
Yeah, safety feels like a position to me where it's like you said, like a lot of interesting names, not necessarily like, wow, a bunch of big time playmaking difference makers, but like those aren't the guys that usually hit free agency. So that feels like a position where there's a good supply for the demand, where I don't feel a lot of pressure to go out and say, let's go get the top guy. Let's go get, Kobe Bryant or whoever him and paying Brisker top dollar money, like whoever the top guys are. Like, I feel like I can let the bidding wars go up for the big guys and then kind of swoop in and get a more reasonable price on someone I think like Nick Cross from the Colts. I don't know that he's going to get them as that top tier free agent safety money, or Geno Stone from the Bengals, or even like Reed Blankenship from the Eagles, I think is a starting caliber safety out there. Kyle Duggar from the Steelers. Like, there's a lot of different options out there of guys that sure aren't going to be household names in the Pro Bowl conversation every year, but just can plug and play. And if you find the guy that you feel like is the best scheme fit for Dennis Allen, it doesn't need to be, the world's most special playmaker on the back end. Like, I need more of that money going into playmakers up front, and knowing that just the guys on the back end can kind of take care of business and just be really solid and reliable. That's all I need from them.
Lauren, who's the next name at the top of your list that you've got?
I mean, I look around and I still want to keep loading up on the interior as much as can. So like, I know we talked about John Franklin Myers from the Broncos, but I'd keep a close eye as well as on David Onyemata from the Falcons, who was once a longtime Saints interior defensive tackle, who I just think if you're looking for, again, like veteran at a good price, who's come in and you know what you're getting, certainly from a scheme fit and also just from a career production standpoint. Like, I know he only had 1 sack last season with the Atlanta Falcons, but he doesn't need to come in here and be like your truly dominating pass rush specialist, but someone who can just hold up the interior, give you more of a run stuffing front, but with that inside and outside versatility, I think in Dennis Allen's scheme as well. I think he's a guy who just has enough, is a well-rounded high, like, I don't want to say high upside, but like well-rounded piece that can just kind of fit in wherever you need him to, that you just kind of know what you're getting, can be kind of an all reliable in there to give guys like Grady Jarrett a little bit more of a breather and can kind of play kind of half roles with each other and maybe get the best out of both of them as a result.
Taylor?
Yeah, I agree. I think that this offseason is going to be so much of working on that defensive line. And so when you go through some of those and you look at the free agents, again, I feel like there's guys like a Draymond Jones, for example, who the names like you feel like are super recognizable. How much do they fit in Chicago and how well do you think that they'd be able? Because when you look at, for example, a Draymond Jones this year, and you look at the versatility too, he's played outside linebacker. You add that in the pass rush, but I know this year they also would have him move inside a little bit too at times. And so again, I keep always going to the versatility side of things because I feel like at least this last draft in free agency, it felt like they brought in guys that could play multiple roles wherever they were, whether it was the back end, the secondary being able to play nickel and outside, or safety and nickel, or whatever the case may be. And then up front, drafting guys that have played everywhere on the defensive line. You see all these examples of it. Kind of feels like that's where they want to go. So someone like that, I think that could be fitting, but I think we're going to see a lot of focus on the defensive line, and that's which route do they go in that? Because do they have faith still that a Javon Dexter, this isn't, it's Ryan Poles guy, but it's not a Dennis Allen guy. Do they feel like they've seen enough out of a Javon Dexter this year to kind of lean into that? Andrew Billings, obviously, I feel like we're kind of like at the tail end of that. So you've got a lot of things you've got to figure out on the interior defensive line. So I do think that there's several names that you may just have to kind of keep an eye on. There's, again, Lauren, to your point, there's not a lot of flashy names, I feel like, but you're not going to see a lot of those. So it's kind of, what guy do you think can stop the run? That was a big issue. Maybe you go heavy in that. Someone who is just a run stopper, because that's kind of what you're missing with Andrew Billings and what happened this last year, and probably what's trending forward.
Taylor, anyone else on your list that you've got that you're interested in the Bears targeting in free agency?
Yeah. So, and I don't, this is another one where I probably don't put it at the top of my list of needs. Just like I wouldn't put the wide receiver there, but we're going to have the running back conversation of what goes on there. I saw something earlier about, I've seen multiple, Travis Etienne, Kenneth Walker, both those guys I think are going to make decent contracts. So do you think that's worth it? The one thing I will say is when you look at Detroit and, them drafting Jahmyr Gibbs and then paying David Montgomery $8 million, I wouldn't be surprised if Ben Johnson, if he really likes one of those two guys, I think both are fitting. Both can be used with their pass catching ability. That way you can really just let Kyle Monangai be who he is and run guys over, and get a guy who's really good in the pass catching game and can do screens and all of that type of stuff. And I think that you can both, Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne are both guys that you could probably focus on that. So the contracts matter in that, but I feel like those are two names that you at least have to kind of address just as you're moving forward and trying to decide that running back room and what the offense looks like in the future and what Ben Johnson wants. Because I think that's one thing we learned this last year too, is that Ben Johnson's one of the guys that look how heavy he focused on the offense this year, and it drastically switched from what we saw during the Eberflus drafts. So I would expect that to continue. I think he wants to put the best possible weapons around Caleb Williams, and he wants his team to be able to score 40 points. And the way you do that is have the run game continue to do what it's doing. So those two names I would keep an eye on. I do think they're probably, Etienne, I think, is going to end up probably making 9, maybe more 9, 10, something like that. Kenneth Walker just made himself some money if he doesn't get tagged. But that's like over 11 million they'd have to use to do that. But those two names, just because I do think the fit in a Ben Johnson offense and what they'd be able to bring I think would help the Bears offense a lot. I lean more Kenneth Walker just because I do think Etienne, with the injury, missing his whole first rookie season and kind of the tread that he has, is maybe a little bit more worrisome than what you'd be able to get out of Walker for long term, at least.
Yeah, the running back position is going to be interesting to watch this offseason because you can kind of see it both ways. Like on the one hand, yeah, he was not afraid to completely overhaul and blow up that position in Detroit, even when it was working well enough. I mean, it wasn't like stellar, but Jamal Williams led the NFL in touchdowns that one year, and Swift had some of his best seasons in Detroit in terms of yards per carry. Like the running game with those two backs were fine, and they still said, screw it, we're drafting Gibbs and we're signing Montgomery and we're getting even better at that position, despite it not being maybe this huge glaring need, but something that had room to upgrade. And that kind of feels like maybe where the Bears are right now. Like definitely not a big, huge glaring need, but could you upgrade at running back? Absolutely. So do you see Ben Johnson take that approach, or do you see Ben Johnson take the approach of last year where he said, we spent all offseason talking about, oh, they got to get rid of DeAndre Swift. They got to upgrade this. They got to use an early draft pick. They got to trade for a guy. And they didn't. They mean, 7th round pick and DeAndre Swift. And he said, that's good enough. This is my group. So I'm torn here because he's an easy cap casualty to say, oh yeah, cut Swift and save $6 or $8 million, whatever it is, and you can find a replacement. But he had the opportunity to move on from Swift last season if he wanted to, or to try and find another upgrade or more competition last year. Plenty of free agents, even after the draft, J.K. Dobbins and others were sitting out there that you could have brought in. And the fact that he repeatedly seemed to turn down those opportunities makes me feel like they're going to turn them down again this offseason. But he's a wild card with the Gibbs and Montgomery situation, so we could see them turn it over, blow it up, and say, no, we really wanted to make this even better. And I think it may depend on just what opportunities present itself. Like, well, if Kenneth Walker or Etienne or whatever doesn't get the market they thought they would in free agency, and the Bears could swoop in and say, hey, we got some good value here. Sure, if a running back happens to be there in the draft that they like, sure, but I don't think they're going to go in the offseason saying this is going to be priority number one or anything. That just so many other bigger fish to fry in the roster. At least I hope it's not a high priority right away.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like a lot of it also just really banks on Monunga and just like how much you believe in him. Like, is he running back one, your main ball carrier next year? Because if he is, then maybe you're in like the Kenneth Gainwell territory if you're going to move on from DeAndre Swift, where it's just like, hey, this guy's just going to come in. He's really just going to be a pass catcher out of the backfield. Like, we're really going to let Monunga punish people running downhill. Like, that's the plan going forward. I think it's one of the more interesting ones because it feels like the other needs are very obvious with the Bears, but that's one where, like you said, Lauren and Taylor, where it feels like it goes in so many in different ways. Like, they could just give DeAndre Swift a new contract and extend him out and save some money that way too. Like, I think we kind of have to be prepared as Bears fans of just like anything and everything besides trading up for Jeremiah Love, which I wish they still could, is on the table at this point.
Yeah.
I have a question. Top 10.
I have a question for you too, because this is like one position group we haven't talked about yet in free agency. Do you see them addressing the offensive line at all when it comes to, obviously, Ozzie probably not playing next year, Theo a free agent? What approach do you see them doing when it comes to at least the left tackle position?
Well, did they end up doing the Theo contract? I thought I saw.
They did? Okay.
Yeah.
1 year, $1 million, basically.
What a steal.
So they roll with that?
I think they kind of can. Like, it's hard because it feels like it's really based off medicals at that point. But it's one where I think it's kind of similar to running back, where it's like, do they just roll with Theo and bring in a veteran? Do they, take this opportunity to draft someone if someone falls in their lap at 25? Like, I think that's, to me, is the other ultimate question. Because if they don't feel confident, then maybe we should be looking at guys who are going to be hitting free agency this year and be like, yep, you have to go acquire one of them. My gut tells me like they just kind of roll with what they got. That like between Kieran, Theo, maybe a cheap veteran, that like they're okay at left tackle going into next season.
Yeah, I feel similarly. Like they showed. I think we are a little bit. I don't know what the word is. Not biased, but like I think we put a lot of stock in. Oh well, they moved Tooney to left tackle for the playoff game, so they must not trust Theo Benedict, and we forget that like they benched Braxton Jones for Theo Benedict and had Benedict start like 6 games in a row. And then you may also recall week 18 against the Lions when Ozzie Tubilo was banged up. Theo Benedict started that game at left tackle. So like there were multiple instances of them trusting Theo Benedict. And the fact they didn't in the playoffs means something for sure. I don't mean to write that off and say, oh, no big deal. But like, I do think, I would imagine they have a certain idea in their head of like, well, he'll get a lot better this offseason. Another full offseason work with Dan Rochar now, and that between him and Karanamagaji, and then whenever Trapillo can come back, that they should, I imagine they'll feel like they can get by if it's 4 to 6 weeks to start the season. But if they feel like, man, Trapillo might miss the whole year or whatever, then I could see, like a 1 year older veteran type of player just to kind of be a stopgap competition guy to come in that you're not naming him a starter right away, but just feel like somebody who's done it a little bit more than the other guys you have on the roster.
All right, speaking of tackles, let's look at the other side because Darnell Wright is due for a big payday. We'll get to that next year on the Bears Squad Show. This episode of the Bears Squad Show is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert start to finish without the stress or guesswork. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. It's a huge time saver and gives a real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit turbotax.com/local to book your appointment today. All right, guys, so Darnell Wright, he's due for fifth-year extension, big contract extension. The 2023 class is all eligible for that, the first-round picks. There's some interesting names in this class of guys. Like, will they get paid right away as well? Your Paris Johnsons of the world and things like that. Peter Skoronski, obviously not really a tackle at this point, but slightly factors into the conversation. Lauren, where are you at with Darnell Wright? Is it for sure given the 5th year, or are you, pay this guy, make him maybe the highest paid right tackle in the NFL or just right below Penei Sewell?
Yeah, I think part of it is like where the conversation is with Darnell Wright's agent right now, because is Darnell Wright's agent saying, yes, I should be the second highest paid right tackle in football? Or I think it'd be third. I think Tristan Wirfs is technically ahead of Penei Sewell, but they're essentially the same contract there. Like, so like, are they coming to the table right now asking to be like at the top of the market? Or like, the thing I'm trying to assess is are you getting any discount by paying him right now? Like, as opposed to if he has another really good year, the price tag goes all the way to the top, right? If he has another strong 4th season, then he's going to want to be highest paid young right tackle for sure. Is there any room right now in the negotiation to say, well, maybe not? So those guys are at $28 million. Lane Johnson's at 25, and then Zach Tom and Taylor Moton from the Packers and Panthers, they're at 22. Like, if I can get Darnell Wright in that $20 to $22 million range right now, I'm signing that deal, no questions asked. If his agent's like, no, we want to be at that 28 number like Sewell, or even just slightly below it, then am I saying, well, if I'm going to have to make him the highest paid right tackle when I sign the deal anyway, is there an urgency to do it right now? Because you never know, like if he gets hurt next season and misses half the year, all of a sudden does that price tag come back down a little bit? Like, not that you're banking on it, but if you're going to have to pay the top of the market anyway, then there's not as much of advantage to getting it on the books right away. But if you can settle him in somewhere, because, well, he's been very good, but he hasn't been Penei Sewell. He wasn't a finalist for Protector of the Year just yet. Then, yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of guys that that are good, like Darnell Wright, paying them sooner rather than later. But if there's no advantage, then I don't mind waiting a little bit.
Yeah, I think that because I was reading that the tag, the 5th year option, if you were to give him the 5th year option, it'd be like a little over 20. If he would have made the Pro Bowl, it would have been 25. So that's one of the things where we're like, give us our Pro Bowlers, but then it may save you money when it comes to some contracts. But when you're looking at those, because I was looking at just like the top ones. So Rashawn Slater, obviously his is 28.5, Wirfs is 28.12, Penei 28, and then Trent Williams 27.55, and Charles Cross 26.1. I think if you have it in that range right now, and like, let's say right behind a Penei, I say, why not? I feel like, go ahead. The Bears, one thing they've struggled with, and I constantly see them on the list of this, is they're one of the teams with the lowest amounts of second contracts from guys they've drafted. And that's a combination of things. Some of that is drafting bad and not being able to find that talent and wanting to give them a second contract. Sometimes it's just not developing them properly. And then you get a Leonard Floyd who doesn't work here and then goes somewhere else and works. And then you get ones just that don't end up, they're fine. So you don't give them a second contract because you don't feel like they're worth the money at the time, or you don't have money, or whatever the case may be. This was Ryan Pohl's first pick. And I think that this is something, as the Bears GM, and I think that's something that he should lean into and be like, look, this was my first ever pick as the Bears GM. And this guy is one of the top when it comes to pressure rate allowed and all of the categories you want to put him in. Darnell Wright sits in the top 10 of almost every category of the tackles in the NFL. So I think you go ahead and pay it, get ahead of that, having to deal with that contract in the future. I feel like if you end up deciding to give him a 5th-year option and you have to pay him 20.1 for that year, when you decide to have to pay him after that, this is going to be even higher. By that time, you're going to be talking about 29, 30. And so if you can get him in that 26, 27 range, I would say do it right now.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And I guess to kind of connect it back to that conversation we just had before the break is, I feel like if they were like set at left tackle and you knew you were good to go, then maybe I feel a little bit differently. But I hate the idea of dancing around a Darnell Wright holdout potentially at some point. Like, you never know with these guys. Like, if you give him the 5th-year extension, like, he might hold out this offseason at some point. Like, you just don't know. It's a total, it's totally unexpected with how these players each individually handle it. So you've got this offensive line where, like, you fixed, 3 of the 5 spots. Darnell Wright's already good. So your 4 of the 5 are there. Plus Tooney and Dahlman, and Jonah Jackson, they're not extended to be here forever. So I feel like having like that staple piece of your offensive line just makes so much sense. And it worked well with Caleb. Obviously, like, he got the Iceman magic of still protecting his guys deep into plays when Caleb is there. So I think, to me, it's I hope you can find a little discount, like you're saying, Lauren, not the second highest paid right tackle in the NFL, but to me, it feels like it's a must this offseason. Maybe priority number 1, honestly, along with the pass rush position.
Yeah, and one other caveat I'd throw in here is, if there's going to be any discussion at all of potentially moving him to left tackle, as a solution here of move him to left tackle and have Theo and sign a right tackle or whatever it might be, or move Trapillo back to right tackle. That's always been sort of lingering in the background. If there's any discussion of that, sign him to the contract right now.
Yeah.
The top left tackles and right tackles make the same amount of money, but from everywhere below, the right tackles make a lot less. Sure, if you're number 1 or number 2, all the tackles are the same, but there are only 4 right tackles that are making over $20 million, and there's 12 left tackles that are making over $20 million. That, even though in the modern NFL, right, they're essentially still equally valuable, NFL teams still do tend to pay left tackles more than right tackles. So don't move positions before you lock them in at the right tackle price.
Yeah. And Joe, I like your point of having that, you feel like your foundation for the line, at least, because you have these guys for, 2-3 more years, but you already have that question at left tackle, and you're hoping Ozzy's that, but you also have to, he's going to be coming back from a serious injury. So how quickly and how does he look the same after that? And I've heard some people have certain concerns with that. So we'll see what that looks like. But having that piece that you feel like here is our foundation of the future, and a guy who technically could play both sides if you absolutely need it. He's been a phenomenal right tackle, but if he really needs to and they wanted to test that out, you have somebody who could. So I do think having that just a little bit of stability with your line for at least the next few years, and then beyond that with your right tackle, I think is super beneficial. So if you can lock that in, I don't know why you wouldn't.
All right. Taylor's very familiar with the Bears' new offensive coordinator, and maybe we're getting a resolution, or we're close to a resolution of, is it Indiana? Is it Illinois with the stadium? How are we feeling about having a dome potentially? Because Brian Urlacher said he hates it. He said that during Radio Row Week. So we'll hit all of that next here on the Bears Squad Show. All right, guys. So the Bears don't really do an extensive search for offensive coordinator. They put in a couple requests. One of them gets denied, and Press Taylor is going to be the new offensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears. Obviously not calling plays. We heard from players, during this last Radio Row Super Bowl week about how important, Declan Doyle was to this roster and to halftime adjustments. But Taylor, I have to start with you, since you cover the Jags, as well. It's, when you heard this news, how do you feel that this was the decision that Ben Johnson made?
Yeah, I'm not stoked about it, but there's also things to preface with that. And I think with any situation, you have to look at kind of where they come from and separate that sometimes. And that's a hard thing to do for me just because I was so angry at Press Taylor for several years here. I think that go back to there's a lot of confusion of what the Jags offense was actually doing, who was calling plays, who wasn't calling plays, what things looked like. That's part of what I don't like. There was a lot of just kind of like, I don't even know what to call it. Like, I don't want to say lying, but they wouldn't ever tell you who was calling plays. Like, it literally the whole offseason before, not this last year, obviously, but the year before that, the whole offseason, we'd ask Doug, are you calling plays or is Press calling plays? It doesn't matter. Well, whatever. We'll see how it goes once the season starts. We'll ask Press. I don't, we'll see. That's up to Coach Peterson. What happens? We'll ask Trevor, who's calling plays. Trevor would be like, I don't really know who's calling plays, whatever they want to do, we're good with. It was such a weird dysfunctional thing happening in that building. And it was really frustrating. It was like, they were just like gatekeeping something that didn't matter. And it was strange. There was rumors coming back to the 2022 season where obviously the Jags started slow. They ended up having that stretch at the end where they won a ton of games. They made the playoffs. They ended up, coming back in that game against the Chargers in the postseason and winning. The rumor at that time was that Doug Peterson was calling the first half plays and Press Taylor was calling the second half plays. So everyone was like, well, that's great. They were coming back. They kind of had the Bears type of mentality where it was like they were losing in the first half of a lot of games. And in the second half, the offense would all of a sudden score 3-4 touchdowns. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember that Chargers playoff game. Trevor Lawrence threw 4 picks in the first half, and then they ended up coming back and beating the Chargers after being down like 21-3 or 21-6 or something like that. So that was kind of the mindset that following year of, oh, well, Press Taylor should be calling plays then. Like if in the second half everything worked with Trevor and offensively, then Press should be calling plays. Why is it this big like secret of whatever, play calling gate that we had? I have no idea. And so then everything looked terrible. That following year, everything fell apart. Trevor regressed. His footwork got worse. His mechanics got worse. They had the most drops in the NFL. Nobody knew the routes they were running. That's when Calvin Ridley came here, and it was just like he didn't know the playbook. It was just such a disaster. And a lot of people pointed to Press in that because they were like, okay, well, it seems like everything was been kind of given to you as the offensive coordinator at this point. And so then the judgment really came on Press at that point because it kind of seemed like that was the issue. And so we don't really know. That's the problem. So when I say I preface this, it's just judgment of because there's a lot of unknown of what was Doug and what was Press and who was doing what and who was in control of what. But what you did see was Trevor get worse. And that is what scares me in this sense is because this year Liam Cohen comes in and immediately it was like, why are you throwing that? Why are you leading with the opposite foot? We need to flip your hips. We need to do this mechanically. They change everything. And Trevor has one of his, his best season when it comes statistically in the NFL. And it took a half a season for him to kind of get all of the things that Liam Cohen and Grant Udinski were teaching him. But to me, that's another thing. Why didn't Doug Peterson or Press Taylor at some point be like, Trevor, why are you throwing with the opposite foot forward? Let's switch this. You're taking too long in your progressions and having to do everything because he had to flip his whole body when he was throwing the football. And so it was just a lot of questions surrounding that. Now, there's things that obviously Press was good at because in that 2022 season, you did see certain developmental things happening with some of the young Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram had 2 of their career years here in Jacksonville. And how much was that wide receiver coaches? I don't know, but there were certain factors in that where you saw some positives. So there were some things at the end of that season where you're like, okay, Press Taylor does some things really good, but he also has this weird, I don't know. Doug had some control over him, and that's why you also have to separate those situations because I do trust Ben Johnson. And that's why when this was announced, I tweeted and I said, look, I don't love it personally, but I'm going to trust Ben because Ben obviously has nailed every hire that he's had so far. We saw the Bears go from the worst total offense in the NFL last year to 9th total offense in the NFL this year. And that's with Press Taylor being the passing game coordinator. So I have to take a little bit of a step back and say the situations were very different. Doug Peterson's a very different coach than what Ben Johnson is. The weapons were different. the Jags had a bad offensive line and couldn't run the ball. And there was a lot of things going wrong to point to why the offenses didn't work. But I have some hesitations and just more so his direct work with Caleb Williams. And that's what I hope is not affected.
Yeah, I share a lot of the reservations about Press Taylor. I think the thing with him is that you're right. It's hard for us to sit here on the outside and like pinpoint exactly what was his fault and what he did wrong. But also it feels like a pattern of like, well, he was somewhere involved with this going wrong, this going wrong, and this going wrong. And maybe any of those individually, you could say, oh, well, maybe that wasn't his fault because offensive line was bad or whatever. But like enough of a pattern of like, it seems like he's been involved in enough things going wrong that you're skeptical about that he's got something to do with those. Now, on the other hand, I think what gives me the most peace of mind here, and again, not a huge fan of the decision overall, not my first choice by any means, is that at least he was in the building last year, right?
Yeah.
And that if this was them bringing in Press Taylor from outside, if he had just been on the street this past season or an offensive assistant somewhere else for a year off, like I would be a lot more worried about, does Ben Johnson really fully know what he's getting into here? Like, yeah, he's Zach Taylor's little brother, and Ben and Zach Taylor are good friends, so I'm sure he got a good recommendation, but you don't know until the guy gets into the building. But the fact that he's now been in the building for a full year, has been in all of these meetings with Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams, like Ben is as informed as he could possibly be about whether or not Press Taylor is the right guy. So I think I find myself feeling like the risk is significantly lower because that he's been established with these players and with this coaching staff, although I will still have real reservations, and we'll be watching closely to try and figure out like what looks different and how much of that can we attribute to Press Taylor now being the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think it's one of the one advantage I think with where the Bears are just at with their staff is like if Dennis Allen was your head coach and Press Taylor was your new OC, I think we'd all be freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Like if Ben Johnson was the OC and left for a different job, like it'd be like, okay, what are they gonna do? But the fact like Ben Johnson's still gonna call plays, still be there in place, I think also brings some relief to the situation. Just like if you're not calling plays, like how much can you really mess up? I don't know the answer to that question, but like that's the other one. It's just like it's because Ben's there. I think he gets the benefit of the doubt at this point. I'm still surprised that the search wasn't a little wider. Like it felt very quick of just like, here's one or two requests and here's Press Taylor and this is what we're doing and we're moving forward. And like maybe that was just the plan from the moment that Declan Doyle was even hired to the staff, was like throughout the year was like, hey, this kid's going to get an OC job or a head coaching job. When he leaves, Press is going to come in, take over that role. We feel comfortable. So I give Ben Johnson the benefit of the doubt, but it wasn't the name at the top of any of our lists.
Yeah. This is what my hope is we saw and Ryan Poles saw and George McCaskey saw and Ian Cunningham's gone now, but all of this building saw that Kevin Warren, what happened last year with Shane Waldron. And from what I've heard of all the reports from inside, people I know that work with Caleb and inside the building and some of the players that have done interviews like off the record or have chatted off the record, it was dysfunctional back into camp. And like there were players in camp saying, we don't like Shane Waldron. Like Shane Waldron isn't working. This offense isn't going to work with him. I'm hoping those guys in the building that saw that happen and heard it at least had conversations with Caleb Williams, with DJ Moore, with, some of these guys offensively that were working with Press Taylor and listen to them. And that coming from that, my hope is that Caleb was like, I like him. And that's why it ended up being this way. Not saying they would fire or keep or promote just because of what Caleb Williams says, but my hope is that they listen to him. And if Caleb was like, I don't think that's the best choice, that maybe they would have searched a little farther, just because of how dysfunctional everything was the year before. And you really don't want to have to, yes, not being a play caller, you still don't want Caleb Williams and the pass catchers to have to work with somebody who they don't feel like they mesh with, because they already had to do that. And we saw how bad it got.
I would bet Ben Johnson's first choice was Drew Petzing before he went to the Lions. And I would bet in a lot of this process, Ben Johnson struggled with, can't get guys here to take this role because it's not a play calling job, right? Like everybody's going to go for all the play calling jobs first and foremost. And then who's ever left is who you got to get to fill this non-play calling offensive coordinator job. And it wasn't like a particularly strong, pool of offensive coordinator candidates out there when, they're like some Matt Nagy and Brian Dable, I guess. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury ended up taking some kind of role with the Rams that we're still figuring out. I mean, there were guys out there, but I just think Ben Johnson probably couldn't get the top guys he might have wanted. And then from there, it's like, well, do we want to bring in a total outsider or just say, yeah, let's keep the continuity inside the building? Like I get where he's coming from, and definitely could have been worse. So I think we could be talking about John Morton as the Bears offensive coordinator right now because he's Ben Johnson's mentor, and that works so well in Detroit. Like I'm willing to kind of say that Press Taylor's not what we want, but he could have done worse with Morton or like Darrell Bevel or somebody that just would have raised some red flags.
All right, last thing we'll hit on here, and this is obviously it's a little strange because like at the moment none of us live in Illinois, so like it doesn't totally affect us in the way that it does necessarily affect Bears fans in terms of taxes and all that fun stuff that comes with the new stadium. But we did get news this week that Illinois was re-engaging with the Bears about a stadium in Arlington Heights. David Kaplan then jumped in and said Portage, Indiana has sent this proposal that's, there's free rent, basically, is what he said in his tweet. So it still feels like, based on what Kaplan's reporting and other people, it at least feels like we have a resolution coming soon. And that this can kind of move off of topic from Bears fans' minds of where's the stadium going to be? How am I going to get there? Am I taking the Metro? Am I driving to Indiana? Like, what is this going to look like? So, Taylor, I don't know how you feel, but I'm kind of just glad it's almost over at this point because I'm tired of hearing about it at this point.
Yeah, I think you just want an answer. Like you said, there's a lot of thing that goes into it, but it also, you're adding a lot of attention to something and taking it away from something that's fun right now. Like the Bears are fun for the first time. Like if the Bears are coming off another 3-win season, people would probably be like, whatever, let's talk about the stadium because it gives us something fun to look forward to and things to learn. But right now you're talking about a team that just won their first playoff games in over a decade. And I want the focus to be that. I don't want to have to keep having these conversations of, is it going to be in Indiana somewhere? Is it going to be in Arlington Heights? It's going to be downtown. I'll say going to that Bears-Packers game in December really made me want them to keep it downtown. I'll tell you that. That was the moment where I was like, man, that's just like, you're not going to be able to replace this on the water, wind, like weather, just environment of everybody leaving that stadium and doing the walk through the tunnel and all of that stuff. But I totally get them wanting to do something where they can build all around. I've been to several places that have that, like the Battery the Braves have in Atlanta. It's so much fun to have something where you can go and spend your whole day and have shops and restaurants and music venues and stores and like all of these things that you need. So I totally get it. But I do think that finally feeling like we're getting closer to a resolution when all of these other teams like the Jags get theirs finalized, the Bills do, the Titans do, and all of these other teams are checking off the boxes of, okay, here's our stadium will be done by this time. You just want that. You want to know, you want to be able to plan. You want to know, I mean, the Jags here, they're obviously just renovating. It's in the same spot. So there's next year's limited capacity. They're gone a year. They'll be back that next year. Like to have a plan is definitely the start of something at least. So it feels like we're maybe getting closer to that.
Yeah, this whole thing feels like a story that we all make to be a little bit bigger than it actually is. Like, I mean, it's such a sticker shock kind of thing of like, oh, what if the Bears were in Indiana? That is unreasonable. And of course, like, how could anyone tolerate that? But like, this stuff happens all across sports all over the place where like, the Dallas, I mean, I realize state lines make it a little bit blurry, but like the Washington Commanders are in Baltimore, are in Maryland. The Dallas Cowboys are in Arlington. We just saw it in the Super Bowl. The San Francisco 49ers play in Santa Clara. Their stadium is about 42 miles from downtown San Francisco. I just plugged in the map. Soldier Field to Portage, Indiana, same distance as the 49ers are from San Francisco. So like, yes, crossing a state line feels like it's sacrilegious, but like still Chicago area Bears. And like, it doesn't really end up affecting a ton of like, yeah, I mean, you could just still flying into the Chicago airport. You're still going in downtown Chicago and then driving over the same way they do in Dallas and San Francisco and all these other cities across the country. Like, yeah, it's more symbolic than it is functional in terms of the controversy here.
Yeah, I think the other two, like, thing for like the Bears perspective is we know where the next 3 Super Bowls are going to be played. It's Los Angeles, Atlanta, Las Vegas. That's it. Like, there are no more Super Bowls booked at the moment. And it's like, if you want one of those ones if you want the 2030 Super Bowl, you kind of got to put shovels in the ground at some point. Like, it's kind of time where, like, if that's what you really want to have, you got to start building out your stadium. And, like, and to your point, Lauren, like, the Chiefs just did this, obviously, right? Like, they're moving states. technically, and it's now like Arlington's going to be farther for some people than downtown is. So like there's good and bad here. I'm kind of indifferent at the moment. Like I mean I remember taking the Metro, from where I grew up in Illinois to Chicago, and we would go through Arlington Heights. So it's one of those where I was like, oh well, if I ever move back to my hometown, like that's a 30-minute train ride for me. Actually, it would take me less time than getting downtown and dealing with all the parking and everything. But yeah, I just wanted this to be a conversation that's over at this point. Last thing we'll hit on, just because we haven't talked about it, I'm just curious your guys' thoughts. Obviously, the Bears want that Super Bowl. We know a dome's coming, but Taylor, like, are you happy they're going with the dome, or are you going to miss like Bear weather in the playoffs?
Yeah, I'm very much in the mindset of I like sports outside. That's just kind of how I am. I get the arguments against it. I get, the rain when it comes to, because I'm the same way with baseball. I want to watch baseball outside. I get the rain and delays and all of these things and whatever, but I just think there's something special to have that element. That's your element. Like Denver doesn't get that altitude taken away from them, but like we possibly get the wind and snow and whatever taken away from us. And so I don't totally love that. I just also feel like, to me, and again, maybe it's just because going from watching like the Jags outside my whole entire life and the Bears outside my whole entire life and the Cubs outside my whole entire life, the teams I love have played outside, and I've had games where I'm standing in pouring rain, and those are some of the most memorable ones. The Justin Fields sliding across the wet field was something I'll remember forever. That adds to moments for me. And I think that, we're going to remember these last playoffs of, the snow that happened in the third quarter in that Patriots Denver game. Like, I love those moments and having those memories personally. And so I don't really want them taken away, but I totally get, the mindset. I just feel like now we're getting all these cookie cutter, everything's the exact same, which is like housing developments now too, where it's just like everything's the same. I like originality a little bit more, but that's just how I am.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, yeah, if you could wave a magic wand and say, yeah, keep them outside, I would. But functionally, in the modern day of stadium building, like, you have to build a venue that can be a year-round entertainment center to make it worth it financially. So I totally understand that, like, in a cold weather climate, like, that's just going to be a reality here. But I can't help but feel like it's going to be a cold day in hell before Green Bay ever gets a dome. And so if the Bears are going to be playing on the road in Green Bay, you don't want them to have any kind of outdoor advantage. And Ben Johnson can still have his guys practice outside. Like, functionally, you don't become a soft team the moment you build a dome, and the Vikings still play well enough in the cold outside. But like, it does feel like the league is trending towards everyone's going to be in a dome in the next 50 years or whatever. But like, again, is Green Bay they're going to be the last team to crack. And so I don't want to, I hate to let them have any kind of advantage up until that point.
Yeah, I guess Buffalo too. They're the outlier here. They're building their new stadium. It's not going to be a dome, which still shocks me, because they're the one city where their games have been canceled because of too much snow. So it's like they're the one where it's like that would make the most sense. I guess that'll put to bed the conversations of can you kick at Soldier Field? Like, that's a conversation we won't ever have to have again with Cairo Santos having an advantage of being good at Soldier Field but not being able to kick it from 50. So there's good and bad with it all, but I'm with you guys. I would have preferred the Bears to keep it outdoors, but I get it. They were, I think, last in attendance last year in the NFL, even though every single game was sold out essentially. But the stadium's small. They want to be able to host Taylor Swift concerts. They want to host Final Fours and WrestleManias and Super Bowls. Like, I get it, but it's going to be strange when 2030 or whatever rolls around and the Bears are an indoor team for the first time in our lives. All right. That will do it for this episode of the Bear Squad Show. Thank you for listening and watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave us a like or review. Check out Lauren Monday through Friday on the Locked On Bears Show, as well the Daily Show. We'll be back with you for another squad on Friday at 10 a.m. as well in this group next Tuesday. So we will talk to you then. Peace.